CHAPTER IX. Part III. Of History of the Christian Church during the First 6 Centuries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. History of the Christian Church during the First 6 Centuries by S. Cheetham. Chapter IX. The Church and the Empire. Part III. According to Rufinus's version of the 6th canon of the Council of Nicaea, the Bishop of Rome had entrusted to him the care of the Suburbicarian churches. What we are to understand by these Suburbicarian churches is by no means absolutely clear. Considering, however, how closely the ecclesiastical followed the civil divisions, it is extremely probable that the Suburbicarian churches are those included in the 10 Suburbicarian provinces which were under the authority of the vicarius of the civil diocese of Rome, and which included the greater part of central Italy and the whole of Lower Italy with Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica; and this interpretation is strongly confirmed by the letter of the Council of Sardica to Julius, Bishop of Rome, which recognizes him as the official channel of communication with the faithful in Sicily, Sardinia, and Italy. But many causes tended to extend the authority of the Roman Patriarch beyond these modest limits. The Patriarch of Constantinople depended largely for his authority on the will of the emperor, and his spiritual realm was agitated by the constant intrigues of opposing parties. His brother of Rome enjoyed generally more freedom in matters spiritual, and the diocese over which he presided, keeping aloof for the most part from controversies on points of dogma, was therefore comparatively calm and united. Even the Orientals were impressed by the majesty of old Rome, and gave great honor to its bishop. In the West, the highest respect was paid to those sees which claimed an apostle as founder, and among these the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul naturally took the highest place. It was, in fact, the one apostolic see of Western Europe, and as such received a unique regard. And the tendency to regard Rome as an ecclesiastical center and standard was no doubt increased by the fact that in the provincial civil courts of the empire matters not regulated by local law or custom were decided according to the law of the city of Rome. Doubtful questions about apostolic doctrine and custom were addressed certainly to other distinguished bishops, as Athanasius and Basil, but they came more readily and more constantly to Rome, as already the last appeal in many civil matters. We must not suppose, however, that the churches of the East were ready to accept the sway of Rome, however they might respect the great city of the West. When Julius of Rome, who refused to concur in the deposition of Athanasius, invited him and his opponents to appear by delegates before a council of the Western Church, the Orientals assembled at Antioch declared that he, a foreign bishop, had no right to propose himself as judge in the affairs of the Eastern Church, that every synod was free to decide as it thought best, that the mere fact that he was bishop of a great city gave him no superiority over other bishops of apostolic sees, that his predecessors had never ventured to interfere in the internal affairs of the Eastern Church. But, in spite of this rebuff, the disputes about Athanasius, in the end, undoubtedly tended to strengthen the position of the see of Rome, which sided with the orthodox and victorious party. The Council of Sardica, after the secession of its Oriental members, gave to bishops who were aggrieved by a provincial decision leave to appeal to Julius, Bishop of Rome, meaning no doubt to give to those who were oppressed by Arian synods a protector in one who was a steady friend of orthodoxy. But the precedent was not forgotten. A generation later, at the request of a Roman synod presided over by Damasus, the Emperor Gratian issued a rescript permitting in many cases an appeal from provincial tribunals to the see of Rome. But the decrees of provincial synods were still regarded as binding. Pope Siricius himself, when appealed to against the decision of a synod at Capua, declared himself incompetent to entertain a question already decided by competent judges; and Ambrose, speaking of the same matter, urged that the decision of the judicial committee nominated by the synod was of the same binding force as that of the synod itself. The authority of the Roman see increased from causes which are sufficiently obvious to historical inquirers. But the greatest of the Roman bishops were far too wise to tolerate the supposition that their power depended on earthly sanctions. They contended steadfastly that they were the heads of the Church on earth, because they were the successors of him to whom the Lord had given the keys of the kingdom of heaven, St. Peter; and they also contended that Rome was, in the most emphatic sense, the mother church of the whole West. Innocent I claims that no church had ever been founded in Italy, Gaul, Spain, Africa, Sicily, or the Mediterranean islands, except by men who had received their commission from St. Peter or his successors. At the same time, they admitted that the privileges of the see were not wholly derived immediately from its founder, but were conferred by past generations out of respect for St. Peter's see. But the bishop who most clearly and emphatically asserted the claims of the Roman see to preeminence over the whole Church on earth was no doubt Leo I, a great man who filled a most critical position with extraordinary firmness and ability. Almost every argument by which in later times the authority of the see of St. Peter was supported is to be found in the letters of Leo. If the power to bind and loose was conferred on all the apostles, it was through St. Peter that it was transmitted to them. It was to St. Peter that power and commandment was given to feed the flock of Christ, and it was in Rome, the place of his burial, that the power given to St. Peter was in all ages to be found. So far was the Roman bishop from receiving dignity from the capital of the world, that it was through his presence that Rome became what it was. He conferred honor on the city, but the city gave no dignity to him. It was in the name of St. Peter that he, Leo, presided over the Church. It was as God and St. Peter prompted him that he gave judgment. He called on the other bishops to help him in the care of all the churches, but the plenitude of power remained his own peculiar attribute. If, however, St. Peter appears in the forefront, Leo does occasionally bethink him of St. Paul, who was, he admits, a partner in St. Peter's glory at Rome, though he was much occupied with the care of other churches. Generally, however, from about the middle of the 5th century St. Paul is but little spoken of in connection with Rome. The Empire of the West never seriously interfered with the proceedings of the Roman bishop, and when it fell, the Church became the heir of the empire. In the general crash the Latin Christians found themselves compelled to drop their smaller differences and rally around the strongest representative of the old order. The Teutons, who shook to pieces the imperial system, brought into greater prominence the essential unity of all that was Catholic and Latin in the empire, and so strengthened the position of the see of Rome. The Church had no longer by its side one great homogeneous state. The Gothic kings were not inclined to meddle with the internal affairs of the Church. Odoacer, indeed, issued an edict that no election to the papacy should be held without the sanction of the civil government, but Theoderic laid down the golden rule, little regarded in after times, that he could not exercise sovereignty in matters of religion, because no man can believe upon coercion; and Theodahad held that as God permits diversity in religion, it would be presumptuous in a king to attempt to enforce uniformity. The East Gothic dominion in Italy was in fact in more than one respect advantageous to the popes. The kings of the Arian Goths were disposed to befriend them because they were generally in opposition to Constantinople, while at the same time the Catholic people of the West honored them as their rallying point against the incursions of Arianism. It is not wonderful that under these circumstances the claims of the popes increased and multiplied. They claimed to be the highest court of appeal for the Western Church and to have a general authority in matters of faith and discipline over the whole Church throughout the world. In support of these claims they appealed to imperial edicts and canons of councils. They were as anxious as ever to ground their claims on the privileges conferred on St. Peter, but they could not always avoid an appeal to the civil power. In the disputed election of Symmachus to the papacy, both he and his rival Laurentius appealed to the Gothic king Theoderic at Ravenna, who placed Symmachus on the apostolic throne. But, consistently with his principle, he allowed an edict of Odoacer, ordaining that no election to the papacy should be held without the concurrence of the civil government, to be annulled in a Roman synod. The partisans of Laurentius persisting in their charges against Symmachus, another synod, the Synodus Palmaris, was held in the following year, which acquitted Symmachus, or